Hi, Kristen. Thanks for joining us again today and guiding us through. I know you're going to be talking about the 12 steps and specifically steps 5, 6, and 7 today. So anxious to hear more.
Hi, everyone. My name is Kristin Snowden. I'm a marriage and family therapist in the state of California. I have a background with, I worked under Rob Weiss with drug and sex addiction, but I also, in my private practice, I kind of deal with a lot of, I guess, less crisis, less acute, just marital and relational struggles. So the past several webinars, I've been kind of trying to devote it to a discussion of how do we change our circumstances? How do we change the things around us? Because, you know, this relationship as it stands right now, I'm unhappy. This isn't working for me. There's a lot of hurt. Maybe there's a lot of disconnection. I feel alone. I feel unsafe. And we're trying to figure out ways to change that pattern. I talk a lot in the first several webinars about how our brain really doesn't like change. We fight it with everything in us because our brain likes to have just really simple, basic neural pathways that we go over through the same pattern. Even if that pattern is insanity, we still prefer it. And then there's a thing that we try to change through just behavioral changes of, okay, well, maybe if I do X, Y, and Z, then things will be better. You know, so maybe what if I lose weight, or if I get that promotion, or if I go to church more, or if I ask him or her how her day is more often, then things will be better. But so the most recent webinars, I've been talking about some of the 12 steps, or the way I explain it, kind of my interpretation and my perception of how I received the 12 steps. Because it is a program for change, and it's not just a program for behavioral changes, which I think a lot of times 12 steps is considered kind of like this legalistic black and white. I even see comments under my YouTube channel about, you know, AA is a cult, or 12 steps is a cult. And sometimes people's experiences are different. I've personally had, though I don't identify as an addict, I've found the 12 steps to be a pivotal part of my life, and has changed the way I look at things, the way I approach challenges, the way I experience stress and conflict and adversity in my life. And so I've been trying to share that information with everybody. So just to really recap, we've gone through steps 1 through 4 already, which is we admitted that we have a problem, that whatever is going on right now is not working for us, and that our lives have become unmanageable because of it. 2 is that we came to believe that, look, I'm definitely not the one in control here, that maybe there's this power, this higher power, universal intelligence, the ocean, who knows, whatever you want to define it as, some form of spirituality, that that entity can restore us to our sanity, because we cannot do it. And then asking another flawed person to help us is also going to fall short, because we're all flawed human beings. 3rd is that we've made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to this higher power as we understand this higher power, whether it's a God or something other than that. And then the step 4 is making a fearless and searching moral inventory of ourselves. So kind of really deeply exploring our good, our bad, our light, our dark, what makeup makes us us. And it's kind of a way of facing a lot of our fear and shame. And so I'm going to try to explore steps 5, 6, and 7 today to kind of finish off this discussion. Which 5 is that we've admitted to this higher power and to other human beings the exact nature of our wrongdoings. So basically, I feel like step 5 is a complement to step 4. Well, let's just even say complements through step 1 through 4, because we've done all this kind of deep, rigorous work of figuring out who we are. Okay, these are things that make me really great, but wow, this is the way I fall short. These are the ways that, you know, maybe harm has been done to me and I hold these resentments against me, and I'm in deep pain because of these things. and I can own that and explore that. But at the same time, I can say, but these are also the ways in maybe other completely different categories of my life that I too fall short. That sometimes I'm not the greatest parent, or I lose my temper, or I'm just flawed in different ways. And it's just kind of, but these are the ways that I'm really great, my generosity, my consideration, etc. And so it's interesting because step 5, which honestly, it's kind of ahead of its time in research. These steps were developed long ago, but now there's just so much more research that's basically showing that we are neurobiologically made to connect to other people. So I've said this in many different webinars, but I'll say it again. Lots of feel-good hormones come out when we're in connection with other people, when we're having that deep talk, when we are doing well in something, like we get a promotion or we get accolades or affirmations that you're doing a good job. Lots of feel-good hormones come out when we're having sex, when we're holding a baby, because it's saying, this is what we need. This is good. Keep this going. Conversely, a lot of negative, yucky emotions come out when we are in disconnection, when we are in shame or fear or hurt about something, when someone has harmed us, if we get rejected or fired, or we feel neglected or in an argument with somebody. So I think step 5 is really interesting because it's just kind of acknowledging that when we are in connection with people, good things happen, and when we're in disconnection, we suffer. And a part of admitting our flaws and accepting ourselves, kind of warts and all, that process, so that step 4 would be incomplete if we did it on our own, if we did it in an isolated state. Because the next step has to be that we show ourselves and we connect with others as part of the continued rediscovery and healing process of our own. Hearing others' stories changes us. Sharing our story changes us. And we're talking again about neurobiology and the neural pathways, how we love, like our brain's lazy and it loves the same, pathway over and over again. When you speak your shame, when you speak the way I fall short, the way that I struggle, the things I'm not proud of, when I share embarrassing stories, that actually brings it back from the kind of non-communicative part of our brain up to our prefrontal cortex, where we can bring in rational thought, where we can bring in, that felt really gross and bad, but now that I've talked about it, maybe it's not that horrible. And just a quick anecdote, I was just doing a couple session earlier today, and this couple was talking about how a lot of their friends were sharing, kind of giving them a call saying that they're in a marital struggle as well. And the wife was saying, it's really interesting when my friend tells me these stories about the problems that she's having with her husband, I hear myself in that story, and I say, wow, that's the way I used to think. That's the way I used to go about it. But now from the outside looking in, when I'm, not invested in the outcome because it's not my relationship, and I can kind of look outside in, I hear that story so differently. And that's just the kind of the linchpin about why connecting with other people, why sharing your story with others can be such a monumental change, such a pivotal change in your soul, in who you are, because you hear it so differently when you're speaking it or hearing it than when it's all muddled back there in the darkness of your brain. So, Brene Brown says that you must speak your shame, because the shame, this fear of I'm not enough, or the fear of these flaws make me unlovable, it thrives in the secrecy and darkness. But it cannot survive when it is spoken, shared with others, and then received with empathy by others. So Richard Rohr comments about step 5, you cannot heal from what you don't acknowledge. Not acknowledging your shortcomings or your struggles allows it to seep into your unconscious. And then of course, that's where the defensiveness comes from, and that denial and that minimization, or maybe it's your fault that I'm like this. So that's kind of what I have to say about step 5. And the idea is that when you share it with a higher power and others, is that it's kind of this idea that instead of being punished and shamed, and hopefully if we punish you enough for being a bad person and we shame you and make it clear that you're a bad person, if we hear your story with love and forgiveness and me too, you know, I'm flawed and I'll love you in spite of your flaws. If you can love me in spite of my flaws, that'll encourage a restoration. So like a restorative justice. So that's step 5. Step 6 is we are entirely ready to have our higher power remove all of these defects of our character. So don't forget, 4 we kind of went through that fearless inventory of all of our stuff that we struggle with. 5 is we're sharing it with everybody else. My guess is during that process, you're adding to the list of my good and bad, right? Because we're rumbling with humans and then we're rumbling with our higher power. And so that list gets longer. And then at step 6, we say, okay, we've come to a place where we're ready to ask our higher power to remove these defects of character. And I think that this is a step where we might lose a lot of people, because I can imagine people's reaction to this step after reading it, you know, after reading the first 5 and then getting to step 6 and going, okay, so I've spent all this time figuring out that I have a very serious problem. I'm surrendering to the fact that I'm incapable of managing this problem on my own, you know, that I'm in my own state of severe struggle. I create this really scary list of all the ways that I'm flawed and resentful and angry. And then this like higher powers going to like, you know, kind of sprinkle his or her fairy dust on me and wipe it all away. You know, like what came up for me is like, do I need to like say a special chant or like have a special seance? Like what exactly happens that makes this suddenly be the moment where I get relief from all this madness? And then the other questions that I think come up is more like anger and resentment of like, okay, so why now? Why after these first 5 steps? Why couldn't they have been removed sooner? You know, and just all this personal struggle that I could see come from that. But step 6 acknowledges that we first have to see and explore and share all the things that might have contributed to the problem, right? So even if, again, if you have been victimized yourself and you're in a state of hurt and struggle, that hurt and struggle and victimization can all still be excuses or obstacles, I should say, to your healing, to transcending this crisis. And before we can fully surrender to the fact that only a power greater than ourselves can actually remove and heal these problems. The grace and relief comes when we accept accountability and responsibility for our stuff, you know, what's ours, our step 4 stuff, but then also let go of what is not ours. You know, that's where the grace and relief come from. Richard Rohr asserts that in order to fully acknowledge that we are in fact extremely imperfect and struggle with powerlessness, but then surrender it to a higher power, demonstrates kind of a higher level of consciousness. So basically, I wonder if perhaps it's that final act of surrendering and faith that keeps our ego in check and stops you for this moment from taking control back again. And a higher power cannot do anything without being invited to kind of come into your life and kind of search around and help you. Step 7 goes often hand in hand, obviously, with step 6, which is that we humbly ask our higher power or God or whatever that is to remove our shortcomings. So I think when we hear humbly asking this higher entity, sometimes the words like prayer or meditation come to mind. So you're not asking others and your higher power to change. You're instead asking to be changed by this higher power. Prayer or meditation or developing a relationship with your higher power may be that kind of symbiotic relationship that allows you to not control this world and your world around you, but to connect with the higher power and kind of sit with and figure out with this relationship with a higher power, what needs to be changed within you, you know, what shortcomings need to be removed within you. We cannot engineer our own transformation. So meaning we can't kind of sit at the table and be like, okay, this is the mathematical equation. I have a problem. These are my shortcomings. These are the things that I need to get rid of. And these are the things that I need to get better at. Because, well, A, we can't be the engineers of that because our best thinking got us here in the first place. Yeah. Our own program for happiness, whatever we thought was working and whatever we thought was the right way, has led us here. So we need to kind of realize that. And then B, if we're the ones developing that magical equation of, okay, this will bring me joy and contentment and happiness, it will just by self-definition be a self-centered and flawed structure, because that's what we are by default, self-centered and flawed. It's just how we are. So Richard Rohr kind of says, you making all these conversions is basically like an alcoholic saying, okay, alcoholism isn't working for me, but I'm going to make a very specific definition of what sobriety looks like. These are the rules that I'm going to follow, and this is the way that it has to be, right? So again, it's that behavioral change, not the soul, deeper, intrinsic change that changes everything, that changes the whole game. This is meant to complement all the steps where we allow our higher power the opportunity through surrendering and humbleness to reveal to us what parts of our lives do need to be changed, what really is working and what's not working, what needs to be altered, transformed. It's definitely a great act of faith and a ton more surrendering that we open our hearts and our minds and try to let go of what our will is, our plan, what we think we need to be, what we think we should be doing, and connect with a higher power, whatever that might be, to allow an organic, intrinsic kind of soulful change happen. A higher power's process of removing shortcomings, Richard Rohr says this to finish this up. A higher power's process of removing one's shortcomings is to fill up the hole with something much better, more luminous, and more satisfying. Then your shortcomings that did exist, they're not exactly like driven away or pushed underground, right? Which is what like doing behavioral changes, kind of surface changes do. They'll just drive away. Oh, I don't like this part of me, so I'm just not, you know, I'm going to do a replacement to this instead. So that drives them away and pushes them underground. But doing these soul deep changes with the connection of a higher power, instead exposes our shortcomings and then just starves them, basically. Starved for the false program for happiness that they are. This is when your true self is supposed to be coming out, right? And that's what we're shooting for. So again, that's kind of finishing up exploring the various steps of the 12-step program for a program for change. I would love for you to be looking at how these different steps might apply to your own life. Read different material on 12 steps, interpretations of 12 steps, and kind of look at the big picture. If the concepts of 12 steps scare you, then try to pull out of it and look at it more conceptually. You know, what are they trying to say here? It was really interesting. I'll close with this last comment. I have a client who had really hard time staying sober from drugs and alcohol for years, lots of relapses. She's now pulled together 1 year of clean time, and she's doing the 12 steps hardcore.
Yay.
And I said, I'm just curious, but do you know, part of her working the steps and being in the rooms for a full year, she's around people who have a lot of really high quality recovery, and then the people who kind of dip their toe in it, struggle with it, think it's a cult, whatever. And I said, I'm just curious from your observations from the past year, does anyone who has like true, healthy, high quality recovery, so they're living a life that you're like, I want to go to there, I like this, do any of them have it without some kind of spirituality, some kind of connection, and some kind of understanding that there's this higher power? And she just immediately said no. And by the way, this is someone who, she herself is struggling with what her higher power is. She's really in that place where she's not sure what it's supposed to look like, how it's supposed to be in her life, and she's still struggling. But she just, all she knows is she sees these other people, and she just knows they don't seem to have that without some kind of higher power. And I thought that was just really, really interesting and powerful. So that's it for the lecture.
Great stuff. You know, I love the steps, so I'm like, whoa. So, okay. So on step 5, admitted to God, to ourselves, and another human being the exact nature of our wrongs. I so believe in step 4, and I think a lot of people actually get really hung up on step 4 because they're like freaking out that I'm gonna have to write this stuff down and the shame and all that. But say they do get to that, then the next piece is sharing it with someone else. And I really do believe that was where my true healing started, was the opportunity to share with somebody who didn't freak out and go, oh my God, you're the worst person ever. It really helped me identify patterns of what was going on for me. Like they could point through things and go, oh, I see that you have, like these 3 things kind of all tied together. Have you looked at that? The other thing was, they went, oh, all of those things are just typical female alcoholic, because that's what I identify most primarily with, and I was like, oh, okay, so there's a reason why. It's not an excuse, but there's a reason why I did all these things.
Right.
And I honestly feel like I left I've done a couple of really in-depth 4th and 5th steps. And then some other ones that are more, I'm going to do one on this area, and then I do the maintenance steps, which are, are 10, 11, and 12. But anyway, with that, the freedom that came from that, the dropping off the baggage that weighed 1,000 pounds of, my past and the shame and all of that, it just really helped. I honestly believe I would have relapsed. And I don't think that there was a way I could have stayed sober had I not done 4 and 5 in particular. So those were really powerful for me. I do think I loved what you were talking about with the stuff is in the back of our heads where there's no light, but there's also no rational thinking. And the example that you shared, that when you heard your story, or the client heard the story from someone else, it lends perspective. I think that that's what the point of all these connections are, whether it's a 12-step group or drop-in groups or whatever, because you get to share something. I've always said the scariest place in the world is this area right in between here. If something gets caught in there, and it's probably back here, but if something gets caught up here, it's doing the spin, and I'm, and as soon as I share it, first of all, I notice physically that the pressure relieves on me, but also the perspective. I remember I was in a tiz, like, you would have thought the world was crashing down. I went to a 12-step meeting, I sit down next to one of my friends, and I'm like, ah, and I'm talking to her. And this was like 10 years ago. So this wasn't like brand new recovery. So, so I sit down and I start telling her, oh my God, and she said, well, do you have a place to live today? Yes. She starts going through this little list, and she's like, I think you're going to be okay. And so like, just calm down. That was before the meeting, in 2-3 minutes of sharing with her and getting perspective. I'm going, yeah, I'm going to be okay. So it's just transformative to be connected to other people and have other input, like you also shared I got myself, and all of us addicts do, get ourselves to the point where we need to go to meetings because of our great thinking. So, we need other people to guide the path. I think with 6, we're entirely ready to have God remove all these defects of character. I think it's brilliant that it comes after 4 and 5, where you're going, oh my gosh, I've got all this stuff. I think that's probably the time I was the most willing to even look at, because I didn't want to keep carrying that around, and you know, and even the humbly asking him, you know, I think for myself, a lot more shortcomings came up. You know, the longer I've been around and the longer I've been in life in general, you know, I'm willing to look at things that were not so glaring. I had to take care of the things that were ginormous first, and then now I can take care of the things that are on a lesser, you know, problem, but there's still a problem, and I want to address those. So it's an opportunity to continue to ask for help, you know, on my shortcomings. So, you know, and what you talked about with the example of the person who kept relapsing, and you asked about the spirituality. My favorite step is number 12, where it says having had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps. We're not promised that, you know, everything's going to get wonderful. It's going to, you know, you're going to not use alcohol. You're not going to have a sex addiction problem. You're not promised anything else. It's just that this is a guideline to spiritual awakening, you know. And you also talked about you know, these are the things that I want. Back in the day, all I wanted was to not hurt and to not, you know, act out. So I didn't even know what all I wanted, but like you talked about with the person sitting in the meeting, it's like the people that had what I wanted were the people that had connected and found joy and could laugh at themselves about the crazy stuff that we had done. You know, that was, you know, I'm still filled with shame about, you know, oh, I'm so terrible. And it, you know, and I'm not good or bad. It's just like I did some things that, you know, I can't even regret, because like they got me to where I am. So I understand that those are part of my journey. You know, I've done my best to, you know, heal the relationships and do the things I needed to do. But, you know, I don't even regret those things that I did, because I'm so happy with what has happened in my life. And the only reason is because I was shown this path through the 12 steps. I couldn't have done it. You know, I didn't have these life tools, which like you're identifying, you're not an addict, but you're finding them to be useful life tools, you know, to help you have a life that is in transition, in a change, that you're open to the change with the, you know, with the guidance of these kind of tools. So I do get resentful when people call it a cult, but I also go, you know, not everybody's open-minded, and it's not going to be for everybody. But, you know, for those of us that didn't get life right off the bat, this is a path, and it's worked for a lot of people. So everybody gets to choose, you know, so you don't have to accept this. So, but yeah, I liked the fill the hole with satisfying things, because that really resonated with me. There was a hole, and it was huge, and I was trying to stuff it with, you know, one addiction or another. And I thought about that too when you said there'd be a replacement, and myself and many other people, if you only stop this behavior, you fill it with another behavior that is also not useful. You know, I mean, I know so many people that have gone to AA meetings. So let's talk about that, where they come to AA meetings, they quit drinking, and, you know, in a few months they've gained 50 pounds, you know, and you're going, well, you know, and I'm not the weight critic, but it's one of those things where I'm going like, I think that, you know, this is the next thing that's, you know, I'm trying to numb out with food. So, I mean, there's lots of examples like that. It's gambling, whatever it is, sex, it's whatever it is. So, really getting to the transformative part where I can change. So I don't have to keep doing let me jump to the next addiction, you know. I'm grateful that there's no chocolate-aholics, because like that one would still be. So I told my husband, I don't have to go to a 12-step meeting if there isn't a meeting for it. So
nice. I like that. We'll make one. Don't worry. There's plenty.
I'm not willing to give that up yet. So anyway, but thank you for all of this. It's really useful information, and, you know, different way to think about it. And I really like that you're inviting people to look at it, even if you're not identifying as an addict. You know, this is just a path to a different positive transformation of life. So.
Yeah. And again, I like to share my story that, and I've said it before in other webinars, but I've been exposed to 12 steps. I had been for many, many years. And since, again, substance abuse kind of wasn't my thing. I didn't think it applied to me, but I had this kind of blessing of a perfect storm where I was in my own personal struggles. I had some major marital struggles, and I was working with Rob, and he was kind of as part of the mentorship of me working under him, kind of re-teaching me his interpretation of the 12 steps. And I was like, well, that makes way more sense. I can hear that.
Yeah.
I understand that. And I mean, and it was in those moments where I was like, forget like addiction. We all struggle with kind of just seeking out these inanimate objects, thinking that they're going to fill our soul, because we haven't done the work to figure out what is our soul and what does truly fill our soul. Or also just kind of going through that insanity pattern of thinking that we're going to get all the validation and worth from being a parent, or from being a partner, or from having a career, because all of those things, while they can be wonderful and fabulous and the highlights of our life, they're too flawed. A partner is a flawed human being. So I'm going to fall short, and he's going to fall short. My children, I adore them, but one thing my aunt made point on the day of my wedding is like, you're only a parent for 18 of those years, like, meaning that the children are the central piece of your life for those 18 years that you're raising them, and then they're gone. And obviously you forever have a connection with them, and you adore them, and they're still an important part of your life. But it would kind of be a scary situation if you were calling them every day. I mean, like, wait, tell me before you get up and go to college, tell me all the reasons that you love me and affirm that I'm doing a good job. That when they'd be in my office. So these kind of things, they're important parts of your life, these external parts of your life, your partnerships, your friendships, your job, your children, they're imperative, and they bring you so much joy, but they have their limitations. And that's just kind of what I want to show everybody is just addicts get to the limitations faster than the higher functioning people do. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Right. Like they do these more obvious things like get DUIs or get drunk or lose their job because they've behaved in a limiting way, a societal limiting way. Higher functioning people that don't have addiction kind of skirt through the societal structures and norms and kind of get away with it a little bit longer before they hit their rock bottom. So
I was kind of thinking of the Wizard of Oz where they're hiding, I've got this facade, so I'm hiding behind the facade
all the time.
But they're, probably just, going, I'm hurrying as fast as I can to try to make sure that the facade stays, just how I want to present it to everybody, because I have a perfect husband and children and everything else. So, that's a lot of work too. So.
And that's the other point I want to get across is when I went through these moments, like I didn't even know what I didn't even know. I mean, I look back now and I can use a better language to describe all the ways that I was in struggle and all the choices I was making that weren't right and all my flaws. But if you asked me 10 years ago, I'd be like, yeah, I mean, like I screw up, but I'm pretty awesome. Like I don't need anybody to save me. I'm good to go. My marriage is fabulous. We're all great people. That would have been my narrative, and I kind of balk and I laugh now at the level of our protectionism, like how much our brain and our spirits try to like protect ourselves with our defense mechanisms of just denial and yeah, don't pay attention to that man behind the curtain. Like, don't, just pay attention to the flames and the excitement of the Oz up there. And I didn't even realize that I was hustling for my worthiness that whole time, and that I still do.
Well, and all of us have our, all of us have those things, and we are probably going to naturally utilize those on some limited basis. But I think we're quicker at identifying when they're becoming a problem than we would have been if we're just, like you said, completely oblivious to, to those things. So Lou Cox, Dr. Lou Cox did a podcast with Dr. Rob, and Dr. Lou Cox is the author of a book called The Ego, the Ghost in Our Machinery. And I don't think we've released that one yet. I think it's in production. But I read that book and it was really interesting. And it talked about our egos and how we have to defend, so that we can we can protect ourselves. Our ego is it's different than the way we use ego in common society and stuff. It was a really good book. I had to take it slowly because it was a lot to process, but it was helpful for me to look at it too. I'm interested to hear that podcast, but like how we defend ourselves, even to ourselves, to make sure that we can keep things, our ego protected. So it was interesting. So we do have a comment question. A woman writes, in April of 2017, my husband of 25 years was arrested for sexting and trying to buy a 13-year-old. He was 75 years old. She had no idea he was living this double life our entire marriage. It was a second marriage for both of us and was respected in a professional capacity in the community. She's completely blindsided and traumatized, understandably. I am just beginning to feel alive again. He was sentenced, so he's going to prison. She's gotten therapy and didn't divorce him for a year, but now she's terrified of him. Her question is, why don't we realize these men are covert narcissists and dangerous criminals hiding in plain sight and abusing women and girls on a weekly basis? He spent a lot of money on the addiction. Their divorce is, our laws in the state still protect his assets. Your question is, why don't we recognize, it's like partners, I hear this often too with partners that go, how did I not see, and,
right.
And so I think that's more of a general question is, how do we, well, first of all, how do we, support ourselves in understanding that we aren't, it's not our fault, it's not our responsibility.
Right.
So I'd like to go to that space too. Nothing he did was your fault or your responsibility. But also I think many partners they feel foolish. I've heard that word.
Right.
I feel foolish and shamed that I didn't see this. What's wrong with me? So can you speak to that, please?
Right. Well, for the first thing that I think might help bring some relief, and by the way, I identify with that so much because that's such a common, painful part. It's a trauma, in the saying we have in sex addiction often is your partner is less likely to leave you for, I'm going to be crude, but for like human sex organs going into each other, than the lies that you tell to hide that behavior. Because that, in my opinion, is the most traumatizing part, is the lying, the living the double life, the looking me straight in the eye when you told me, you weren't coming home that night because you had a deadline, but then I find out this is really what you were doing. So first of all, I just want to validate that what I find can relieve some of this pain is acknowledging that this person was entirely invested in keeping you naive.
Yes. Yeah.
So everything about their behavior, from the job that they had, from the things that they said to you, the lies that they told, the web that they wove, was meant to keep you in the dark. And that's just an extension of how good they were, is that you were completely blindsided. There's a book, I've mentioned it before. It's by Jennifer Freyd. It's called Betrayal, Blindness, How We Fool Ourselves That We Aren't Being Fooled. Some people take this concept of betrayal blindness on as shame, as someone being like, hey, like if you didn't love that person so much, or if you weren't so invested in making the relationship work, then you would have had your eyes open, wide open, and you would have seen all his lies and destruction. That's personally not what I got from the book. I personally got this sense of relief of these are the different reasons why betrayal blindness occur. None of them are in a blaming way. It's just kind of helping you understand how relationships work, how pair bonding works, how kind of mutual, healthy reciprocating of of trust and love and connection exists. And but then also giving you a language to kind of feel empowered to not let this happen again. I joke that the book that I've been planning on writing for the past 7 years, and it's slowly been moving along at a very slow pace, is how to rekindle and re-empower your intuition after you've been devastated by betrayal trauma. Because I think when you go back and you look at what happened in the betrayal trauma, when you really understand how insidious gaslighting is, that you can kind of, once you have these tools and language for these tools, you can kind of turn back on that instincts and intuition that was kind of turned off by the manipulation and the lying and the gaslighting that he was doing to try to keep you in a naive, ignorant place. And you can turn those on and kind of fall back on those key skills to heighten and sharpen your instincts and intuition so you don't get victimized again. And I don't know if that's helpful.
Write the book.
Yeah, someday.
We'll talk. It's much needed. The other thing I want to point out with this is I have no idea if he's a sex addict. He's clearly a sex offender. That's at a whole different level. There are some people that are offenders and addicts. There's that, I always say it's the Venn diagram and the people that fall in between, but he clearly was very invested, as Kristen said, in keeping you out of the loop, and I'm sure he was really adept at the lies. I was talking to a partner yesterday that was and she shared very legitimate things about why all the lies, and I was like, I get it, I understand, and I'm not making excuses, but you have to understand he's very invested in keeping his ability to act out at all costs. And that's what I read in this too, at all costs. I mean, he had a professional career. He did get busted for all this, so he had a lot to lose, and still, did not disengage from the behavior. So I also want to share, there are resources on this site, so please engage in the partner drop-in groups. The Prodependence webinar is every other week, but there's a couple of them that were recorded. That would be a great opportunity. Dr. Rob's book about prodependence, getting so much positive feedback, but now the workbook is in process, and that webinar is tools that will be utilized in the workbook are being shared on the webinar. So, hope you'll engage with that, but lots of partner places for you to have support. So please join those. So any other questions or comments? We'd love to hear more. I did add to the chat, The Betrayal Blindness. It was the name of the book that you,
Jennifer Freyd.
I didn't put that in. Fine. Is it F-R-A-I-D?
F-R-E-Y-D.
Okay, I would have not gotten that right, so.
Yeah.
We have a little bit of time. Any other comments or questions?
I'd be curious, since everyone's there, is anyone confused? Let's say if you don't identify as an addict, which I'm assuming several of you do not identify as an addict, and you're hearing these steps, can you make connections about how step work can help you in your own personal problems and struggles? Is that making sense to everybody? Or is it like, I just don't see the connection? I don't see how step work can help me with my relationship struggles.
You can answer that in the chat to just panelists, and it will just come to Kristen and I, and then we'll see your answers and no one else will. We can just kind of look at that. So we would love to have feedback on, on any of this as well. So. I think I will tell you, I talked about the drop-in groups and webinars. I will tell you, we have a treatment program opening March 31st. It will be, the first offering will be an intensive with Dr. Rob in the Los Angeles area. It will be for men with sex addiction and or intimacy disorders. Very small group, 6 to 8 men, depending on which facility we end up using. Then after that, the program will be for co-occurring sex addiction and chemical dependency. So some terms are chemsex. That's usually stimulant and sex addiction, so meth and sex or cocaine and sex, but also could be that people are drunk, alcohol, or other chemicals. So if they're co-occurring, research has shown that it is very tough for people to actually get sober and remain sober without treating both of those simultaneously. And there aren't places that really do this and do it well. And so Dr. David Fawcett, who's also has a webinar on our site and is the leader in the field for chemsex and has written the book and has also done a fascinating documentary on that, is going to be participating with Dr. Rob on this chemsex program that will be starting in Los Angeles. And we're also opening a program in Thailand. So that will be initially for men. So there will be resources coming for women and partners too, so stay tuned. But those are both starting in March 31st for the 2-week intensive with Dr. Rob, and then in April for the co-occurring and also the program in Thailand. So any questions, don't hesitate to reach out. So somebody had a comment, as a spouse of a sex addict, I have S&On 12-step workbook, and yes, it has been very helpful to identify with the 12 steps from my own perspective, as well as watching an interview between Russell Brandt and Dr. Jordan Peterson about applying the steps to everyday life for the average person. I'll have to read that or watch that. I guess it's probably a video in a very, for average person explained in a very different way than most meetings do. And there's another one, I'm the betrayed spouse. My husband is a sex addict. I'm using the 12 steps to help with my healing. Great, good. I'm glad people are finding it helpful.
And then there's one more in the chat or Q&A.
Oh, I didn't see that one. As a 5-year sober alcoholic, I can see how the steps can help me even now, but also dealing with my husband and his betrayal issues. I can, like narcissism, I can see how the 12 steps can independently help me with my own journey if I decide to stay with him. Narcissistic abuse help too.
Well, you're seeing something different than I'm seeing. I see another one.
Oh, I see another one. Yeah, I gotta scroll up. I was down below. So while I'm not in the steps, I'm a partner of an essay. I am finding the explanation of these steps extremely helpful, as I can see how they can be used in life. My life in specific is humbling, to be honest. I honor where you're at, and that, you know, I hope you engage with them, because I really do think you'll find them transformative. Crisis management tips, anger, grief triggers help. 12 steps is very informational, but not ready yet. Crisis management tips, that is what the prodependence is. So please, please, please watch those 2 webinars that they've already been posted, and those are only on the first and third Fridays, but the prodependence drop-in group, which is for partners, and then there's another one starting on Sunday night. All of those talk about that and can be really helpful too. But yes, if you need a specific therapist, can help you find the right person. But that's what prodependence talks about. It's managing the crisis, you know, while rather than from the framework of codependence, which is, you know, a label and has not been totally helpful for partners. So let's see, did I miss any others?
Well, and should we ask? I mean, Karen's asking for crisis management tips.
Yes, please share. Yeah.
Yeah. So a couple webinars ago, I talk about how are you experiencing trauma from your relationship? And so I really try to talk about this crisis management as a betrayal trauma kind of model, which is honestly, I parallel it to, let's say, a military person coming back from war, and it's 4th of July and they're hearing fireworks and getting flashbacks. I feel like people who are dealing with or just freshly dealing with betrayal run that what feels like out of control gamut of feelings: anger, grief, hurt, victimization, blame, shame. I mean, you can run that all in like a 30-second wheel. The roller coaster of it, it just makes you feel very out of control, which again can be another shaming thing, right? Because it's like, oh, how am I gonna be lovable and repair and heal ever again if I'm in this like emotional unstable state? So for sake of time, I'd encourage you to just kind of watch that one video on am I experiencing trauma from my relationship? And then also actually in that holiday video, kind of how to do family events, how to go places with your partner when you're fresh out of the betrayal, kind of the realizing what your new reality is. Those two videos can kind of help with the tips of okay, this is what's going on the inside of my body, and these are kind of some tactics, tips, skills that I can use to kind of manage what feels very uncontrollable here. And then the kind of rules for engagement with my partner, going to public places, going to outings, with me being so raw and in crisis.
Yeah, and anger, grief tips or triggers. You're angry. You absolutely deserve to be angry. This is a huge betrayal. So, but finding safe places to talk about that and vent it and things like that. It's it's not telling everybody and their brother, because that's not going to be safe for you either. But finding supportive people, whether it's a therapist or a 12-step group or these drop-in groups, etc., where you can talk about your anger, you can talk about your grief. And I talk about it a lot on these webinars too. It's like if you're betrayed, we have to grieve the loss of what we thought we had. We thought we had this great marriage and we thought we had everything, and now we are grieving the loss of what we had. Have to, think about what it is that we could possibly have, or if we even want that. But really the betrayal, the grief, the anger, all of that is, and it feels so big and it's hard. And I think about what Kristen shared a little bit ago, and that feels like it's all here, where I can't even think about it or think of a path through this, so, but sharing it, as I think it just helps take the pressure off the pressure cooker, to be able to just share that. And especially when you share it with people that understand, when you talked about, the person that heard their story from someone else, you get a different perspective on it, and people can then go, hey, have you thought about this? Or here's what I see. So. Let's see. There was another, so a follow-up. I cannot change my husband's abusive behavior, but I can change how I deal with it, meaning I can make my own happiness and joy. I can be honest with myself about my role in the relationship, etc. Yeah, and I think that, I think this helps you, the 12 steps can help you, find that path. And for me, I've learned that my happiness is not dependent on my circumstances and, things all going smoothly in my life, because gosh, they never do. So, I can have joy, despite what's going on. And I think for me, one of the things that was huge with the 12 steps was learning that everything is temporary. The good things are only temporary, and I try to really enjoy them. But if something's really bad, and death is final and things like that. So I get that there are caveats to this, but most of my circumstances are temporary, they're transitional, or my emotions are temporary with it, or there's a way to make it different. And so, just understanding that this doesn't have to be forever, for most things, it's, that has helped me as well. So any other comments or questions? We're so grateful you were here. Kristen's moving to once a month now, so she'll be here on the first Wednesday of the month. So watch for other things to plug in with, and you can find previously recorded ones of Kristen's webinar on YouTube as well, so they're posted there. And what's your website?
KristinSnowden.com.
Okay.
KristinSnowden.
So yeah,
And you
please.
can search me on YouTube under that as well. That's my YouTube channel.
That's great, because like all of them that have been recorded, are posted there as well. And there's been some fabulous content that I think you'll find helpful. So, well, thank you all, and we will see you next time. Thanks, Kristin.
Bye. Thank you very much. Thank you for joining.